Okay, guys, this is going to be a little bit different setting for sure because I'm sitting in front of a busy street because I had somewhere I had to be. So I'm going to go through the notes that I have for this lesson, and I'm going to attach some things that I want you to open up and look at. You can pause the video or just pull it up ahead of time and print it out. However you want to do it, I don't care. So I'm going to talk about phrases and clauses this week because you need to be able to identify phrases and what kind of phrases we're talking about. You need to be able to identify dependent and independent clauses because it matters when you're building a sentence that you can identify those things and know how they work. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into that. Um, I'm going to give you 5 different kinds of phrases. The first, and this is all on your printout, you can, well, I mean, it's all on the attachment that I gave you. You can print it out or you can just have it opened up so you can go back and forth and look at it. The first is a noun phrase. And a noun phrase is just the noun and any modifiers that are included with it. So I have some there for you. I really don't want to read through all of these because you guys can all read and you don't need me to read these to you. But if you just look at the sentence there, my sister, her teammates, a world-class athlete, none of them, and a single word. Those are all underlined because they're all noun phrases. You have the noun there and you have the modifiers that go with those nouns. That's a noun phrase, okay? Probably in the reading that any reading that you'll do, any writing that you do, you don't have to think to yourself, this is a noun phrase. But you need to know what it is so that you can identify it later and be able to punctuate accordingly. Okay. The next one that I want to give to you is an adjective phrase, and that is basically an adjective phrase is any group of words that will modify a noun or pronoun. And an adjective tells what kind, which one, how many, and whose. So when you get to an adjective phrase, that adjective phrase is going to do the same thing. It's going to modify the noun. It's going to tell which one or how many or whose is it. Okay, so I gave you some sentences there too. One giraffe was taller than all the rest. Taller than all the rest is the whole phrase goes together and it's modifying giraffe. It's talking about the giraffe. It's telling you which one, what kind. And you can look through the rest of those sentences. I don't need to read all of those to you. Okay, just look. I've underlined the adjective phrases there. The adjective phrase is going to modify the noun or pronoun, okay? Verb phrase. A verb phrase is the main verb plus any auxiliary, any helping verbs that go along with the main verb. This is your verb phrase, okay? And I've underlined these. You guys have used verbs since you could talk. You know how to put these together, okay? This is a verb phrase. An adverb phrase is next. And an adverb tells about the verb. It tells how, when, where, and sometimes it tells why. And so an adverb phrase is going to do the same thing. And I've got some of those underlined for you. You can read them. Prepositional phrases. This one is a doozy. You must know what a prepositional phrase is. If you don't know what a prepositional phrase is, remedy that. You have to remedy that. Avail yourself of the internet and all the people putting up videos like this one. All the people that want to teach you what a prepositional phrase is, please take advantage of that. Learn what a prepositional phrase is. You have to be able to identify those. If you cannot identify a prepositional phrase, then you don't know how to punctuate it. Okay, you got to know what this is. Okay, you got to find out. Okay, a prepositional phrase starts with a preposition and ends with the next noun. So a preposition, I go this way. Preposition to the next noun is a prepositional phrase, and any modifiers in the middle, okay? A prepositional phrase can be used as an adjective, as I did in these first ones here. The boy in the truck, the dog without a collar, the guy on TV. Well, which boy is it? The one in the truck. Which dog is it? The one without a collar. It's an adjective. It's modifying the noun, okay? The prepositional phrase is being used as an adjective here. All right, they can also be used as adverbs. So if I say something is buried in the sand, some kid sat in the doorway, This person followed the leader into danger. Well, where is it buried? In the sand. Where did the kid sit? In the doorway. Where did the leader lead? Into danger. These are prepositional phrases that are used as adverbs. They're modifying the verb. They're telling where. And some of them will tell when or how. Okay. I don't want to continue with that because you guys know how to find these phrases. If you don't know what a prepositional phrase is, make sure that you do. All right. Clauses. So a phrase does not have a subject and a verb. It doesn't have both of those. A clause has a subject and a verb. Some of them can stand by themselves as complete thoughts, and that is an independent clause. And some of them, even though they have a subject and a verb, they can't stand alone. They depend on more information, so you can't just leave them. All right, so the example that I gave you some here. The lights were turned off. Subject and verb. It's a complete thought. It can stand on its own. The next one is when we left the gym. Well, you have we and you have left, so you have a subject and verb, but that can't stand alone because you have when at the front of it, and that is a subordinate conjunction. If you don't know subordinate conjunctions, again, you need to know subordinate conjunctions so that you can identify the dependent clause. It's important. You have to be able to identify the dependent clause so that you can punctuate correctly later. We're going to be building on this. You must know the subordinate conjunctions that lead right into a dependent clause. Okay, so when you're going to put an independent clause and a dependent clause together, if the independent clause comes first, then you just put them both together seamlessly, just as they are. You don't need any punctuation between them if you have an independent clause and then you have a dependent clause coming after that. But when you have the dependent clause that comes first, you write your dependent clause, then you put your comma, and then you keep going with the independent clause. Okay, you can put those together, but if the dependent comes first, it's dependent clause, comma, independent clause. That's the way it works. It always works that way. And I gave you some examples of those. When you have two independent clauses, if you have two independent clauses, two complete thoughts that you're joining together, and it's perfectly fine to do that. We do it all the time, and it actually adds a little bit of color to your writing if you can vary your sentence structures, okay? It's perfectly fine to combine independent clauses, but when you do it, you have to combine them with a comma and a conjunction. You cannot just put a comma there, just a comma, and combine two independent clauses. That's a comma splice. That's a no-no. Don't do, if you love me at all. If you love me at all, do not combine two independent clauses with only one comma. Comma, conjunction, if you're combining two complete thoughts, okay? I don't want to keep going with that. I'm sure that we'll talk some about this as we go along, and as I read your writing, occasionally I'm going to say, hey, you need to fix this and this. But if you already know this stuff, that's a lot less for me to say, hey, you're going to need to address this. Hey, you're going to need to go back and add a comma. Hey, you're going to need to go back and add a conjunction because you can't join these with just a comma. If you already know this, it's less for you to have to go back and read from me. And I know that y'all don't want to read my comments on your stuff anyway. Okay, I'm moving on to what I'm going to assign this week. This week, we're going to do something called found poetry. Found, F-O-U-N-D, found. And that just means that every line of your poem is going to be written by somebody else. You're going to see this line of poetry, and it's okay for you to drop words out of it, but you cannot add any words to this. You can't add any words to somebody else's words. These have to be found lines of poetry. Okay, and so I gave you an example of some lines that I found in an essay, and the author is Walter Wengren Jr. And I gave you some poems from him at the beginning of the year. Solomon Grundy was one of those. It was the narrative poem, and that was really fun. I like this guy's writing. He's fun to me. And so I was reading one of his essays, and I really liked some of the lines that I found, so I put them in a poem, but they're all his lines. I picked the ones I wanted to use. I dropped some words out here and there, but these are his words that I just arranged. That's what I want you to do. This is found poetry. Somebody else that does a lot of this is an author named Annie Dillard, and I may give you some of her stuff too. Maybe she has a whole collection of found poems where she's just taking somebody else's lines and she's arranging them um, in her own poem, but they're all somebody else's words. She's just arranging them. So that's what I want you to do this week. I want you to use, you can use any writing that you want. You can use poetry, you can use a story, you can use an essay like I did here. Any way that you want. But you find the lines that are most appealing to you, put them in the order that you want. You can put them in any order. You cannot add any words to these lines. They have to be the lines from the author, from the work that you're using. If you want to drop some words out, you can do that. Okay, the other kind is a palindrome. You know what a palindrome is? A palindrome is words or a group of letters or numbers that are they're the same forwards and backwards. That's a palindrome. And that's what I want you to do with your poem this week. I want you to write a palindrome poem, and I will send you, I gave you an example here of one that I wrote, but I will also send you some examples in your email. So watch your email, because some of these, mine doesn't have a different meaning if you read it one way versus a different way, but some palindrome poems, if you read them one direction, they mean one thing, and then if you go the other way, they mean something different. And sometimes palindromes can be full sentence palindromes, like the words, like if you look at the first word and the end word and you went backwards to the middle, every word would match the first and last word, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next. It's exactly the same sentence, forward and backward. That's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. If you want to go for that, I mean, be my guest. That's really hard to do. I did not choose to do that. That will take you a very long time. Or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you have this gift for doing things forwards and backwards. Some people do that. So you can choose how you do that. I'm going to send you some examples in your email, so just watch your email for I'll probably do maybe a couple of Annie Dillard poems for the found poetry. I'll probably send you a couple of those. And then I'll send you some other examples of palindromes, just so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, modernism and postmodernism. I probably should have talked about these together last week instead of just talking about modernism. Some people will say that postmodernism is really a reaction to modernism. And I don't know if I would say that it's a reaction so much as one just builds on the other. It's just I think postmodernism is kind of just an outgrowth of modernism and what has come before. Because I'm going to go back a little bit. Modernism really partly came out of what you have in the Age of Enlightenment, where we are going to make ourselves better humans by reason and logic and the science and the math, and we're going to create such technology. And at this point, I don't mean electronics. I don't mean that. I just mean technology that will, methods and machines that will enable us to become better people, that will solve all of our problems. The world, in modernist thought, the world can be understood. We should be able to progress. We can learn to be a better people, and even have this brotherhood of humanity by our own rationalism, by our own reasoning. We can raise the level of humanity we can become better people through those things. Okay. And so at this point, science is not subject to the Word of God. The Word of God is not the authority. Science actually becomes the authority over the Word of God, and the Bible is subjected to all kinds of scientific scrutiny because the Bible is no longer the authority. It's taken down a notch, and all of a sudden, God is irrelevant. The Bible is irrelevant. Man's reason and his standards are the absolute authority. This is really humanism. This is what this is. So God, during this modernism, God may exist. He may actually exist. He may be like the father of all humanity, but he's not powerful. He's sort of, if he exists at all, he's kind of impotent. And so if he exists at all, he doesn't really have a say in our lives. And so all religion at this point is either kind of equally just a feel good religion, or it's equally worthless, just hogwash. All religions are basically the same, because the God of the Bible is no longer relevant. He doesn't matter. He's not all powerful, and the God and the Bible have been lowered beneath science and math and logic and rationalism and our own thinking. We are the standard. Humans are the standard. But you get to, let me see, because we have accepted that, and we have accepted that the God of the Bible does not have any say in our lives, and then we accepted evolutionism. There's a meaninglessness that creeps into this, because if we're just here by total chance and total chaos, if we're just here just by accident, then what meaning do we really have? What meaning is there in our lives? And so it's futile. It's just despair. And during this humanism and this self-centeredness, this human-centeredness that creeps in, there's no right or wrong, really. There's really no right or wrong, or it's all equal. It's all equal. There's no absolute standard, really. And that translates into art and into writing. And oh, by the way, some of you guys hate the assignment that I give you where I ask you to read a poem and find the meter of this poem. Some of you hate that. You don't like doing it. Okay, look. The point of doing that is that I really want you to try. I want you to think about what you're reading, and I want you to see what the author took time to put into it. Because these poets, if they're writing with an iambic meter, or if they're writing with dactylic or trochaic or anapestic, if they're choosing one of these rhythms, they're doing it on purpose. And that's poetry is difficult. Poetry is difficult to read because the poet is not necessarily telling you what he's aiming at. He's aiming at something. He's aiming at something, or she. The poet is aiming at something, because poetry is noticing and naming. Poetry is noticing and naming. And we'll talk more about, I'm sure I'll say more about that later, because I love to talk about that stuff. But when you're reading something that somebody is writing and you're looking for the meter, they put it in there on purpose. And so I'm just wanting you to spend a little time reading, because it's kind of a lost skill to be able to read something and actually think about what you're reading. That's all I want you to do. And so I'm not getting my big red pen out and squiggling all over your stuff if I think you got it wrong. Maybe you got it wrong, maybe you got it right, but my point in this is just to get you to try. So, the last one that I get, that was the last one that I'm going to do. The one that you already did, that's the last time I'm going to assign that. We have 2 more poetry assignments, but I didn't put that on the last 2, so you won't have to do that part anymore. But the last one that I gave you was an E.E. Cummings poem. And if you remember, last week I talked about E.E. Cummings because he was one of the modernist writers. And just as a little side note, um, modernism and postmodernism happened kind of very close together. And so you have some writers who are right at the end of this 1915 to 1945, right during that point. And some people will push that 45 a little bit higher, like I said last week, closer to 60. And then the postmodernism starts late 50s all the way up to the present. So actually, I don't know. There may be another term by now for whatever we're in, and we won't know until years later what people think of this time period. But E.E. Cummings was right in that kind of, some of the things that he was writing were kind of late modernism and pushing into postmodernism. And so he was a guy who broke all the rules. Remember, I did A Leaf Falls with Loneliness. That's the one that I did in class, and we talked about that one in class. He didn't follow any of the rules. He broke all the rules of grammar, and whatever rules of poetry he knew, he broke them on purpose. And so when I gave you on your assignment sheet, I gave you a poem by E.E. Cummings that I wanted you to give me the meter of. Well, it was written in free verse. There's no set pattern for this. And so it was a little bit tricky of me. I wanted to see what you would say. And some of you did say free verse because he's not rhyming anything. There's no rhyme pattern there. There's no set pattern of speech. He's not using a particular cadence in that. It's a free verse poem. So I wanted to see what you would do with that. Anyway, what was I? I'm trying to think of where I was here. Okay, so modernism has kind of grown out of the Age of Enlightenment, where reason was the thing that would make you better humans. Reason and rational thought and sciences and maths and technology, and this would provide a whole new world for humans. We would basically take ourselves out of whatever situation we were in. Well, that also lends itself to finding just the right way and finding just the right truth. So that there still is a search for the right way to go about this. A right there still is a truth that people are looking for, but it's no longer the God of the Bible. It's no longer scripture. It is, you have to find through your own reasoning, through your own rationalism, you have to find the truth. So modernism, that kind of thought was easily used by socialist and communist leaders and freewheeling American liberalism. Um, and it was easy for them to take. Let me see if I'm saying. I want to say this the right way. Okay, I can't find the notes about that I had, but it's easy for a dictator or a leader to take the tools of rationalism and reasoning. It's easy for him to take those tools and say, this is the way, walk ye in it, this is the way you should go. And it's easy for somebody who's charismatic enough to be able to sway other people and get them to believe this is the way, this is the way you should be going, this is the only right way. And everybody else can just fall in line or else. Okay. Um. All right. So traditional traditional values. I don't want to go quite that far, but maybe traditional faith, traditional values, the rules for life are being discarded in modernism. They're being put away because they're inefficient or divisive or maybe oppressive. They may be oppressive. And so mm, for us to become better people, we've got to lose that baggage, that religious baggage that we have, that religious faith. We've got to lose that in order to rationally become better people. This is humanism. Okay. All right. And so that's modernism. And then some people say that postmodernism is really a rejection of modernism and it's kind of going the I don't know if I would say that it's a rejection. I think it's just more of it's just a continuation. And so postmodernism completely rejects that there is any absolute truth. There's not a truth that would now people say that sometimes that they object to absolute truth. But that's when you're talking about religion or ethics. When it comes down to somebody breaking into your house and taking, all of your mother's jewelry, there is an absolute truth to that. Either he did it or he didn't, and either it's right or it's wrong. And when it affects you personally, it's harder to say, oh well, there's just no absolute truth. Everybody just does what's right to them. But that's what postmodernism would spout. They would say, um, there is no absolute truth. And um, after World War II, there was a collapse of maybe the way we thought about humanity. We didn't have decent thoughts about humanity anymore, and we don't trust rationalism anymore. We don't trust that people can be objective, and that's discarded. That's discarded now in favor of finding your own identity and the idea of relativism. And relativism is just that there is no objective truth. There's no objective truth. You have to find your own truth, and in some cases the idea of progress or even freedom is criticized, and instead of um, the promises of wealth and freedom and um, human betterment that were some of the promises of modernity. Remember I talked about the myth of progress? That's what you're getting to here. Modernism was looking at that age of enlightenment idea of we can become better people. And so there's this idea of progress in modernity. And when we get to postmodernism, um you're losing some of that. Then it's just a myth. It's just a myth. And socialism, though it tried to point to a better way, communism would have tried to make a better way. There was this idea of utopia, um, and 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 then you have the American liberalism that also promoted a certain way to achieve the best life, the best society, and none of those really delivered. None of those really delivered, and so you're just left with this collapse of tradition. You're left with a collapse of any faith, any standards of right and wrong that apply to everybody. That's gone. Um, After World War II, returning to traditional faith and traditional um, life was not really going to work. It was not really an option because there was such a loss of faith in humanity as a whole, and the reason that the rationalism, the reason that we had clung to for so long, the thing that was going to make us better people, it's been tried in socialism, it's been tried in communism. We just went to war again. The whole world went to war again, and we still haven't made this place better. And so there's this very, when you get to postmodernism, which is, that this kind of started in the late 50s, but it's extended, and you guys know it. You can hear it around you. There's a very dark and bleak outlook, um, because there's no real humanism doesn't provide any real solutions for the problems that we have. There aren't any fixes. There aren't any fixes when we're just looking to ourselves. There's nothing in us that will save us. We can't make ourselves better people. We can't think our way out of the problems that we have. There's not a way to do it. And so when you look at, let me see. Okay. Okay, so when you're looking at the literature of modernism, it's meant to mean something, but it's also meant to be somewhat complex. It's meant to really show a difference between a high art form and a low art form. They intended this to be sort of a um one of the ones that comes to mind is Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Have y'all read that? I think I've talked to some of you about that. I think some of you have read that. And The Old Man and the Sea, there's a lot going on that he's doing right there, and he's comparing. So it starts off with this old man, and he hasn't caught any fish for a long, long time, and he's not going to make it if he doesn't catch anything. So he goes out further than he should go. He goes out further than is safe, and he hooks a marlin. And it takes him a very long time to haul this thing in. And as he's bringing it in, he's talking about the marlin, and he's talking about the shark, and he's talking about these animals being very worthy creatures, and even on the same plane as a human. He talks about these other creatures being being his brothers. Um, and then he talks about, well, how many people is this fish actually going to feed, and should they be allowed to eat it? Are they even worthy to eat it? Well, probably not. They're probably not. But the fact that he really kind of feels sorry for this animal that he is going to kill and take back to eat. He doesn't actually, well, I won't tell you. I won't give it away. You need to read it or listen to it. I think I listened to it during one of the times that I had COVID. It's worth the listen. But he means for this to be a really thoughtful piece of literature. This is not lighthearted, and there's nothing joking about this. It's a really intense piece of literature thought-wise. It's not packed full of action the whole way. That you don't need to expect that. But he's intending to be very deep in what he's writing. And that's modernism. That's what modernism is. There was the real seriousness to the art then. They were trying to get at something. There was something important that they wanted to communicate. They were doing that on purpose. They wanted to be very thoughtful in their communication, and they were very serious about their writing. And then when you get to I think I'm missing something. Okay, so when you get to postmodernism, there are going to be some things that will okay. There are going to be some things that are a little bit different. One of the things that you're going to find is an embrace of randomness. There's some randomness to postmodern stuff, and I'm not going to give you a lot of really recent poems to read because you really have to be careful with you have to be careful about postmodern stuff because some of it is vulgar. And some of it is just really difficult to read because they're intentionally not making sense. They're intentionally throwing randomness in there or some dark humor, some dark, that's what I mean, some really dark humor, which can be vulgar. And I don't want to give you any of that stuff. Um, the fragmentation that I talked about in modernism, where they're looking at a broken world and they're trying to incorporate that into their writing, you find a lot of that in modernism, but especially in postmodernism writing. There's a lot of fragmentation in the writing, and so you're looking at it going, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense to me. Um, they're trying to incorporate into their writing what they see in the world. And if you don't believe that there's really any meaning in the world, if you believe that life is kind of futile and that there's really no right or wrong, there's no standard above yourself, and that everybody has to do what is right for them, and that your truth and my truth and his truth and that guy's truth over there are just as equal, even though they're all completely different and sometimes opposed to each other. If you can't have a standard that 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 all of these things have to answer to, then you're confused all the time, and there's no way to find any unity in there's no way to have a brotherhood of humanity when there's no standard that everybody lives to. There's no When you don't have any kind of standard that applies to everybody, then this guy over here can be totally fine with something that is terrible to you. And there's nothing that you can say about it because you don't have a standard above you and he doesn't have a standard above him, and everybody just does what's right for themselves. And so when you take that kind of thought into your writing, then you don't really care who reads your stuff. You don't really care what they think about it. You don't even care if they understand it, because what's the point anyway? There is no truth. There is no objective reasoning, and it's just a giving up of trying to understand one another. It's a giving up on understanding the world. It's America has moved from believing in the God of the Bible to deism to really just humanism and a worship of the self. And then you move into maybe there's no religion at all, or maybe people don't even have souls. Um, and it really kind of feels like, I mean, where can you go from here? This feels like the end of something. Something has got to change. When you started at the opposite end of this with the God of the universe who loves his people, and then you come to, well, we're creatures without souls. That's such a long way to go, and I don't know where you go from there. That feels like an ending to me. I did give you. Let me see this one. I am going to give you a couple of things from some modern writers. I gave you three poems. I'm not asking you for meter anymore. I am going to ask you to tell me what you think these are about and what is the tone of these. So what do you think the attitude is of the writer? How does it sound lighthearted? Does it sound kind of dark? Just read through them and answer the questions on the assignment sheet. Um, palindrome poems, found poems. Review. What was this week's class about? What was the lesson about? I hope you took notes. I don't think I have anything more right now. I will try to get this video out to you tonight. And I know you guys are not watching it over the weekend anyway. So I'll try to get it out to you tonight, and that way you can have all that you need to get your assignment in by Tuesday. So if you have any questions, just let me know.